explained yet, it's nice to meet you. I work for South East London Community Energy. There are some new faces in the room, which is really exciting, and some friends that I've seen many times, which is also very exciting. Nice to see you. So welcome to our Festival of Retrofit Conservation for the Future, where we're thinking about the relationship between conservation or houses that we feel like a little bit of custodianship over and retrofit and how they come together. That's just generally the loose focus, but if you don't live in a conservation area or you don't feel constrained by it, there's still be tons of useful information for you today. Hands up if you know about Selce and what we do. Okay, great. Fantastic. So I will just quickly say we're a local cooperative. We're committed to a just energy transition locally. We're concerned about local energy generation, reducing energy use, and making sure that no one gets left behind in the process. And so without further ado, I think we will move into our first panel discussion, our first panelist, who is James Foster from Perpatidou. Perpatidou, thank you. I have a bio here for James, and he is the founder of Foster and Perpatidou, and has diverse experience of producing and realizing exceptional buildings across a range of typologies and scales. James has 20 years experience in the commercial practice in London, working with established veterinary practitioners, including Ted Cullinan, Richard McCormack, Ron Arad, and Richard Rogers. And he comes with a great amount of experience. And he's going to be talking to us today about a few projects that he has, particularly one in the Broccoli Conservation Area. That's actually a new build, but looking at how those choices happen between creating something that is ecologically light, energy efficient, but the general aesthetics of the surrounding community. So with that, I hand over to you, James.
So, I'm James Foster from Foster Perpatidou. We're a local practice, we're super local. We're based in Lewisham, we live in Broccoli. So we're super local. And as the introduction said, I've got background in commercial practice. So maybe the next one. One of the practices that the last practice that I worked with before we set up our own practice 3 years ago was a company called Next, and we worked on retrofit. We worked on lots of things, but this one is most relevant today as a retrofit of a library for Exeter College, Oxford University. It's the George Gilbert Scott building, so listed building, super sensitive. And we were tasked with renovating this library, improving the energy efficiency, making it appropriate for 2025. New insulated roofs, new super insulated slab, underfloor heating, new electrical systems, all LED lighting, and all with the greatest amount of sensitivity because it's Oxford University and it's George Gilbert Scott. So this was the next one. So this is the result. You almost don't know that we've been there. We did unlock a whole other wing, which was used as a storeroom, which became study space. So it was all about more study spaces, more bookshelf spaces. So we unlocked a lot of the potential of this building. We found disused space next to the Bodleian Library, which we unlocked and made it into storerooms and offices. So we sort of really reworked the circulation of this building. So onto what we're doing as a practice. So this is I should start with my partner is a passive house designer, and I will be by the time we finish this project, which is a new build passive house in the Broccoli Conservation Area. So after Chris Anthony did her passive house qualification, we were lucky enough to meet a client who wanted to do a new build house in Broccoli. They are experienced, they've built their own house before, they wanted all the performance better, so they've got their hands on a site, an empty site in Broccoli. Very sensitive site in the grounds of a listed building. It's in the Broccoli Conservation Area. So the planning, we got planning last year. It was a very carefully executed process, lots of dialogue with the planners. It was a good process. And there was, the next one, sort of lots of analysis of the context. You can see in the background here there's the carriage house, which was associated with the listed villa, which maybe we'll see in the next slide. Maybe the next one. Yeah, so there's a listed villa here and a big villa here, and so there was a lot of dialogue with the planners about being subservient to these listed buildings, but also being contemporary. So they were open to the other buildings being contemporary. So lots of careful development. The next one, lots of model making, lots of looking at the grain of the context. So there's the listed villa again, there's the carriage house. And we've essentially produced something which is a similar kind of scale to the carriage house within a single story wing that you don't really see above the garden wall. And then this house has a basement in order to meet the area requirements. So yeah, we are going down into the ground here. So with that, it's a passive house. So it's a super insulated basement wrapped around the outside in insulation. It's a timber frame above that basement, packed full of wood fibre insulation. And there's a lot of passive houses that have been built, not that many with basements. So there's a lot of technical development which we're now doing to tie the two things together. So it's all about the continuity of insulation between the concrete basement and the timber frame. It's all about the continuity of the airtightness internally. So this is what we're doing at the moment, and the sort of the principles of passive house are about making the best use of passive influences, so orientating it towards the south, so we get solar gain. More insulation than you would typically get past building regulations. So we've got sort of 500 mm of insulation here in some places, a little bit less in others. Triple glazed windows, so with insulated frames, and then impressive airtight levels. So it's all about the detailing, it's all about the airtightness membrane, it's all about taping all of the joints to make sure that we're controlling the airtightness of the build. And then to complement that, mechanical ventilation with heat recovery. So this is a system which will take stale air out, bring fresh air in, and it will harvest the heat from the exhaust air and feed it. So it's super efficient and it controls the internal environment. So what about existing properties? So we work on a number of retrofit projects as well. We can apply these principles to retrofit projects. There are the passive house standard requires sort of the completing of lots of detailed Excel spreadsheets with all of the areas and build-ups and performances. You can do the same with retrofit. You can do the same. There's a standard called Enbee. There's another standard called ACV Carbon Light. And so if you want to be really analytical about it, then you can go into detail with these calculations. We have a number of clients with different levels of interest in energy focus. We're lucky, we've got one client, I think the next slide, who I would say is an expert client, possibly knows more than us. And she came to us with an idea, with a design, with some ideas about materials, but she wanted an architectural experience to help her get that built. So that was a lot about, we were producing the timber frame drawings for her timber framed extension. We were helping her with dialogue to realise that timber frame is the best option for extension. And then one of the things she brought to the table was the idea to use as little concrete as possible. So we're using, in the floor slab, instead of a concrete slab, we're using a material called Geocell, which is foam glass aggregate. So it's recycled glass, which is then foamed to make these sort of bits of almost like clay. And then this stuff is then carried in by the contractors on site, and then it's compacted into the ground. So they're sort of hitting it with the whacker plate here, and they're really compacting it down. And this is doing two jobs. It's doing the job of the slab, and it's doing the job of the insulation. So it's very insulated. And then onto this, the concrete screed will go down with the underfloor heating in, and it's a much simpler way of building. So this is a really interesting project for us. So this is a slight variation. They're using a lime screed in this version. We're using a cementitious screed. But either way, we're using a lot less concrete than you would typically, which is great from a carbon perspective. This is another little project. So the last project, the client's an artist. There's a sort of artist live here. This is an artist studio in Chelsea. This is also in a conservation area, so we have to be very sensitive to the conservation officer. Really like the sort of quirkiness of this building, the sort of curve on the facade. So after a couple of sort of pre-application meetings, we realised that everything's going to have to be internal. The changes externally are going to have to be really minimised. So as you can see, it's quite a quirky space inside. It's got a big north light. And the idea with this project is we will be sort of lining the interior with wood fibre, introducing MVHR. So these were some studies that we did when we thought we could change the outside, and the conservation officer pushed back on that. I think for the best actually. So the next one. So we're introducing roof lights to complement the north lights. The next one, and then keeping the front largely as it is, changing the garden wall, adding a tree, and then lining things with wood fibre internally. And then the next one, more on the wood fibre, and then the next one, MVHR. This one is using a decentralised MVHR system. So typically MVHR uses a central piece of plant with ducts that lead out to all the individual rooms. This one will be our first experiment with decentralised. So we don't have the ducts, but we get the benefit of the heat recovery. So, and then this is another enlightened client. This is a townhouse in Blackheath. 3-storey 1970s townhouse, concrete slabs, cavity walls. The client's already done quite a bit of energy-focused refurbishment. They filled up the cavity wall with insulation 10 years ago. They have double glazing, they have PVs, they have evacuated tubes. They want to take it to the next level, so we're doing external wall insulation. We are introducing an MVHR. They want to get off gas, so there's a heat pump. So this is at the stage where we go to the next one, where we're sort of really analysing every nook and cranny of this building to really understand it, to figure out things like where can we put the MVHR, how can we thread these ducts through the building. And then the next one, and we're at the sort of stage now where we're looking at whether existing openings in the slab, whether new openings in the slab, how we can way. And then, this slide should perhaps we've been earlier, but this is just to say that there's this super technical side of things with the passive house planning package, where you're literally supporting all of the numbers and getting out the performance data for the project. And then the last one I want to finish on is we get a lot of clients who are not interested in energy. And it's a shame, but I think we can still work with that. A lot of people, they don't have the cash, they perceive they don't have the cash, they just want a great kitchen, or they think the house is actually reasonably warm. So the last one, this is a project we were approached just to do a pre-glass roof extension, conservation area, lots of glass, full roof extension, that was the plan. So what can we do with that? So we then introduced the idea, well, if we make this out of timber frame, then maybe we can offset some of the heat loss with the big glass windows by absolutely packing this timber frame full of insulation. So we've got 300 mil of insulation here. Timber's a lot more effective as an insulator, and it gives you a lot more voids to fill up with insulation. So we came about using as little steel as possible. That's sort of one steel beam in here, and again this is timber, using being as light on the ground as possible with concrete, concrete slab. So minimum use, and then using the timber where we could, so we've left the timber exposed at the ceiling level, and then adding a green roof, which is good for sort of mitigating overheating and good for biodiversity. So using the interior. So this is sort of introducing the sustainable agenda where it wasn't necessarily part of the brief. So it's night. I think the garden's grown since then. Looking forward to seeing this year, and that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you, James. So there's a lot of information that was in there, and you'll have a chance to sit down. If you see James and you have questions, just pull him pull them aside and don't be polite and ask him, what were you talking about even that? We want to niggle down into a particular issue. Same for everybody here. I just want to, there's something I forgot to say at the beginning because I was aware that we were behind schedule, and that was just about kind of why we're focusing in on kind of aesthetics and structure. They're kind of a triangle of three kind of deciding factors to how we approach retrofit. One is where we live, how it looks. The next one is how to make it more energy efficient, future-proof it, thinking about is the sustainability of our houses. And the last one is that financing piece about what we can and can't do. And all three factors kind of play off of one another for sure. And this particular panel is to kind of just get your inspiration going about what is possible and what can be pulled forward into your retrofit projects. And then as we go through the day, we can drill down into the detail a little bit more about how you can achieve what you'd like within your means, within your pattern, within your context. So that's kind of just the thinking behind it that I jumped over when I introduced the day. So next up, we have Zana Dean, who works with Selce. She's been running our Future Fit Homes program for the past year and a half. Zana, she's also an architect and founder of Tread Studio. So Zana is a fount of knowledge. And anytime I get into a meeting with her, I find I go down a hole that I didn't even know existed in the most positive sense of the word, that it's completely exploratory and opens up new ways of thinking. So Zana's going to drill into practical thoughts about retrofitting and adapting our buildings, particularly with more sensitive areas.
Brilliant. Okay, so we're going to have the Selce is based. The project we've been doing with Future Fit Homes is mostly covered Lewisham and Greenwich. So we're going to have a little bit about that, and then we're going to move on to some examples, which is mostly in London, but not only in those boroughs. And then, if we have time, we'll look at some elements and materials. But I'm conscious of time, so we'll focus on the issues. So Lewisham, and next slide, has got two of the areas that we've been looking at, particularly St John's Conservation Area and next slide, Brookvale Conservation Area. So these are these in Lewisham, the ones we've mostly been looking at, typically Victorian terraces. They've got their own problems, they're solid walls. It might be difficult to change the windows. There's guidance from Lewisham Council about what you can and cannot do in these conservation areas. And as you saw in the first slide, there's a lot of conservation areas in Lewisham. If you go to the next one, Greenwich, massive conservation areas. They're not all Edwardian, Victorian, or listed buildings. We're going to look at number 3, which is Blackheath Park Conservation Area, and here we've got mid-century modern span housing. Is anyone here from this Corner Green group? We're going to be looking at Corner Green in detail as a neighbourhood. So how do you retrofit not just one house on its own, but how do you look at a neighbourhood and then maybe have a dialogue with the planning department about the constraints of planning versus retrofit. So this is like a new thing that Selce has got involved with, is like supporting people not just in their individual homes but in neighbourhoods, and how can we work together to look at solutions. So we're starting to do some modelling, and we're looking at this. Natalie's going to be having a look from an architecture point of view. We've had Waxwing do energy analysis, and we're also doing one of our whole house plans. So because it's 26 different units, we're going to try and get like a comprehensive overview and pull out all the threads and look at which things can be done individually, which can be done as a group, and which things need dialogue with the planners. So it's an exciting thing to look at a kind of place-based neighbourhood approach. So the next slide is an example of a project where this is previous to my work at Selce with Tread Studio. We looked at a building, this is in Islington, it's in a conservation area, but it's a mixture. It had a new build extension that was red brick built in the 70s, which we refurbished with external wall insulation, and it had a Victorian villa. So if we move on, the back, we've also built an extension, a little bit like James. That's an opportunity to go to Enbee, to go to the highest possible energy standards, and there's also an extension on the roof, which was pretty tricky to get through planning at all because it's in a conservation area, so again it was this kind of juggling. But using, for example, not just the materials, but using plants as shading, which are there in the summer. When you want shading, they're not there in the winter. So it's not just the materials, it's the environment as well. Next slide. And it also involved a lot of repairs and renovation. So sometimes you're looking at the fabric, not just from the installation and the retrofit, but really trying to restore a building and bring it back. And the reason that it had an extension from the 70s is that this is actually on Camden Road. The rest of the row of these wooden Victorian villas was demolished to build housing estates in the 70s. So actually there was a point in time when these were all being demolished and all they were really deteriorating, and so there's a lot of repair to be done. Next slide. So we looked at different measures, and this is a charity building, it's not somebody's house. It's houses a charity called Centre 404, which supports people with learning disabilities and their families. It does the most amazing work, and they're very, very visionary in terms of supporting people with learning disabilities, but they're visionary in terms of sustainability as well, because they've got the most amazing charity that thinks ahead, thinks of the future. So they brought in architects who would work with them to maximise sustainability. So roof extension 50% below the standard emissions, passive house sliding doors, rainwater storage, the external insulation with wood wool. We've got some examples over there at the back. Triple glazed windows where we could replace windows, and biodiversity. So that's the side where we're doing up to the 1970s. On the Victorian villa, we've still got wood wool insulation to the slate roof, and we had lead coat capping as well. Draft stripping all the sash windows, so that means actually renovating them and then putting in secondary glazing at the front where we couldn't change the windows. At the back, we actually did replace some. Bicycle storage with sedum, living green roofs, air source heat pumps, so we took them completely off gas, and they went onto a renewable energy tariff, so they went fossil free. Apart from they kept a gas cooker in the kitchen. Hopefully they've moved on from that right now, but we don't mention that. Electric vehicle charging point, because they've got a minibus to take people to and from events, so they've invested in an electric minibus. And permeable surface, so we did it landscape as well. Next one, please. And similar at the back, I don't think I'll list all the measures, but very similar. I've mentioned the pergola. Lots of different elements that could be applied to anyone's house. So even though this is a charity building, they did have funding. They had some lottery funding, they had some funding through the GLA, so it did enable us to spend more than you might spend on your own house. But it's quite nice to have examples where you've been able to go into that depth. Next slide, please. And, that one moves. So where we built an extension, where we didn't have the pergola externally, we actually have external electric blinds. So that might play a video, because that player is very good at that. The blinds would come down externally. Internally, you've just got blinds in case you want to have a blackout for a slideshow. But the external ones don't actually black out. What they do is they screen the sun, so you don't have overheating. And here we are with the existing building loft conversion where we insulated with natural materials. So that's looking at the roofs. Thank you, Flavia. And just go back to the air source heat pump. It was quite hard to get through planning because of the size of the building was quite noisy. We had to enclose the air source heat pump in an acoustic attenuation box, which added onto the budget. But I think most domestic properties, you probably won't have that issue. I think I mentioned the walls were insulated. We filled the cavities before we externally insulated. So obviously you've got not just cavity insulation, but the external wall insulation as well, because cavity insulation, it tends to be quite small cavity in kind of 70s properties. There's not much you can do. And the floors, so in the Victorian villa, there wasn't really any space underneath the floor. It was the ground floor is a raised ground floor, so the lower ground floor is actually nearly a basement. So we took out all the timber, took out all the dry rot, put in a solid floor and insulation, and that's really one way to go if you've got timber floor and not much space, is to actually insulate underneath. Next one, please. Next slide, please. And pleased client, that's the main thing. Happy clients. Next slide, please. So just a few grant-funded examples. So I don't know if anyone remembers the Green Deal Home Improvement Fund, but that was actually, I think, a brilliant government scheme because it actually said, we'll give you £3,000 or £5,000. You might spend £20,000, but it was an incentive to get people to start doing the work. And that was no conditions attached. It was for rental properties and home-owned properties. So both of these properties had work done using that grant, and they had double glazing, floor insulation, wall insulation, internal wall insulation, flat roof insulation, loft insulation, a lot of measures slightly subsidised, but mostly paid for by the owner or the landlord. Next one, please. So this is some of the projects we've done with Future Fit Homes, with South East London Community Energy. This one was an Eco4 pathway, so somebody who was eligible for the grant funding and a contractor through Trustmark, and they had loft insulation, air source heat pump, which was remarkable because they weren't off gas, so they didn't have a gas boiler at all, and solar panels, and it always comes with ventilation and heating controls. So this was a very happy client, and their neighbour actually put on solar panels as well. So they became like buddies, but one of them did get this grant funding. So we were really pleased to have helped to enable that. And this is somebody else who's in the room, got your project here. And so they went for a whole house plan with Selce to help them to have the discussion about what measures to do next and to think through the sequence of events, how much to spend now, how much to spend later. So the whole house plan can really help you to kind of focus on what are the most effective measures, but also your priorities. So in this case, it was loft insulation that I think has gone ahead, underfloor insulation that's under consideration, internal wall insulation, some has been implemented, secondary glazing that's been completed. And that's been a major thing because there's a lot of windows, and the secondary glazing has been fantastic. So the potential savings were to go from EPC D to B, and potentially 600 savings on bills and 4.77 tonnes of CO2, possibly, if you do all of the things. Next slide, please. And this is a case in Newham. Again, it was a grant-funded property. It was an elderly couple, didn't speak English. They had a niece who helped to interpret for them, helped them to access the grants that Selce was able to help them achieve. And this is midway through. This will be all beautifully rendered now. Completely external wall insulated, which was a fantastic achievement. And they're very, very happy with that ventilation that went with that. And these are just, have I got 1 minute? Yeah, so just bear in mind point of intervention. We talk about just do what you can. So this household, they really wanted to do something about their kitchen, which was an extension at the back, built in the 70s with basically no insulation. And so we just looked at that. They didn't have very much ceiling height, so we put a massive amount of insulation on top of their flat roof, a bit like James mentioned. And a roof light insulated the floor, again took up the floor completely and put in triple glazing. So they did one room that completely transformed their living in that room actually. And they had this lovely pergola as well. So I think, should I wrap up there? That was a whole house where someone was able to do all the measures, which was fabulous for us, EWI, solar thermal, And I think I'll finish on that because the next is breakdown of materials, which we can talk about separately. So, thank you.
Okay, so thank you. I think what's really interesting, if you do, a lot of materials, a lot of words have been thrown around today, and there's a lot to be unpacked when you say insulation. That's literally just skating on the surface of what's possible, because there are so many different fabrics, so many different materials that you can use to insulate your home, depending on what your circumstances are, what your property needs, what it wants, what you have going on. So if you do have questions about materials, you can go speak to Zana afterwards, and she's got a materials library over there. So if you do have questions about it, do take a moment to have a look and touch. Some of the materials that are available now are quite beautiful. Like one of them you could even put against your face. It's so soft, which you would never do, at least when I was growing up with insulation. So yeah, there's all that material there that you can touch, have a look at, have a think about. So next we have Natalie, who is the founder of Enbee Architecture and Design. She designs home renovation projects to make them beautiful, healthy, and warm. She's driven to demonstrate what is possible, to build better and inspire change. She explores and inputs into practice, innovative ideas and solutions. She focuses on retrofitting older properties and uses a palette of low-carbon, natural materials to reduce the energy loss of buildings, create healthy indoor environments, and minimize the impact of the building work. So Natalie is going to speak to us specifically about retrofitting period properties. So thank you so much, Natalie.
Thank you. Having seen the other two presentations, I'm slightly wishing I'd put some more pretty pictures. But mostly I'm going to be showing you a little why I'm here and the sort of big picture in the world and why it's important, the materials that we choose, and I'll focus on some how-tos, and specifically look at some walls and some windows and how we tackle that. And then at the end there's just a few small pictures of some finished work. So basically what I've just said, why take this route, why my role is important, why materials matter, some tips on insulating your home, and some results on one of my projects. Now if you're considering a retrofit yourself, I've got an online assessment. I've got some cards there with that, and you're very welcome to try out the online assessment. This is about me. This was me about 2015. I was still like this. I had not taken any attention to the climate emergency, and next slide. I sort of woke up at that point. Next slide. And it kind of felt like a really massive challenge. I don't know if any of you see it like that, but it's like we have to push this boulder up a hill, and it's this massive challenge. Next slide, please. So I was like, what can I do? And I came across something called Project Drawdown. It's an analysis. It's like the biggest study of 100 different ways that you can reduce how the world can reverse climate change. And I discovered that loads of the things you could do are in the building sector. So how much do our buildings emit? Well, the UK is responsible for 40% carbon emissions. 40% of the carbon emissions from the UK are from buildings, from building work and from heating them. And 35% of that is we use 35% of all the energy, and 20% of the carbon is from heating. 20% of the carbon comes from our homes, from heating us. And we've got to reduce it massively by 2050. I'm a pragmatic optimist, I've discovered. And so this is how it basically breaks down across the world. 28% is on powering our buildings, and 11% is to do with the materials that we use to build it. And that's why everyone here talking so far has been talking about natural materials. And 80% of our buildings are already standing. And that's why retrofit's really important, because most of the effect we can have is on existing buildings. And then there's various bodies like Letty, who've done loads of studies into what we can do, what targets we need to make to get there. Next slide, please. And so they've got things like the average UK home, how much it emits, how much power does it need, how much it emits, and the average energy bills. It's probably higher than that now. And then where we need to get to. And the RIBA has done it as well, so they've got their targets for the heating part, the operational side, which needs, they've said we need to reduce by 60% by 2030, which is a massive ambition. And in terms of the building work, it's a 40% reduction in how we do it. So the whole industry is working at that now. We're furiously trying to work out how we're going to get there. So that's why my role is important. And why materials matter. And when I come to designing a building, I've got to choose the materials that go into it or in the retrofit. So there's usually, in my work, it's a combination of extensions and retrofit. And I could choose materials right at the top. Aluminium, right at the top. What's next? Galvanised steel, copper sheet, zinc, structural steel. All the regular insulations are around here. The materials that we're talking about today are all here at the bottom. And that's why they're so important, because they have the lowest carbon. Next slide, please. So you can build a building different ways. This is the old school way. Well, in the 20th century and early this century. If you go further back, it's more like that. And now we're all trying to push our buildings towards this picture, where we're reducing the carbon as much as possible and putting materials in that draw carbon from the atmosphere while they're growing, and then you lock that carbon into the building. Next slide, please. So that's what this is about. Growing takes carbon in, regular materials, they're all above the line, and if you go have low carbon materials, it's starting below the line. So even though you might, all the harvesting, manufacturing stuff, it starts from a lower position because of that being a low carbon material. In some of them, there's some more at the back along the tables there. So we can change and pivot the way we work to make it a positive thing instead of taxing the environment. We can change the whole picture. So how about your homes? Who here lives in a period property? Most people. Is it hard to heat? Yeah. How cold is it? How cold does it go? I've been to houses at 12 degrees. That's pretty cold. I have to keep my coat on. Below 16? Yeah. If we took a thermal image of your house, which one do you think it would be? This one. Yeah, leaking heat. Next slide. Like that. It's like a leaky bucket while being freezing. All the heat pouring out of your building. At the same time, the bills going up massively. So now we're going to just look at how you, just a bit about some detail about insulating a building. So an existing brick wall might have a U value of about 2. And then you can take it down to 0.3, that's with internal insulation. Or if you go as far as, or if you're building something new, you might take it to 0.15, 0.16, or lower. So passive house starts at about 0.15. So this is a wall that we retrofitted. The existing wall here. This is very conveniently in the doorway, so we've managed to get this cross section. We lined the wall. We had to take the plaster off, and then we straightened up the wall with a lime plaster. Then we put something called diathanite, which is a lime cork mix. Then there's 80 ml of wood fibre, and then there's some lime plaster on the top, but it's not here yet in this image. And so this is a bit of a how-to. So we start. So You might start with a wall like this, which is a mix, might have wallpaper on it, and it's got a mix of old plasters and new plasters, and so it's a bit of a mess. Next page. Or it might have bits falling apart, or mould in it, or some water damage. Next slide, please. And then, so this particular house, we had to take take it back to the brick. And this is like a forgotten area which is very easy to forget corners, because there's so many junctions. You might think you've dealt with the whole external wall, but in this location there's a front doors somewhere around here, so you have to insulate along here to make sure you've dealt with the wall that's coming up to the doorway. And then this is another area where people don't think about doing so. They think, okay, I've got to make that external wall insulated. But you don't think about, I need to go through the floor zone. Especially the regular builders, they just want to stop just here to think it's done. But you really need to take it through the floor and deal with that section as well. And if you're putting a new floor in, for us, we put it on compact foam pads in order to not put it in, but take the structure through the insulation zone. Next slide. So this is the diaphanite that I mentioned earlier. They've got these little markers to get it exactly the right depth, so they were able to skim and reach that the right depth. Next slide, please. And then when you put things like the power sockets in, there's a potential that you might get an air leakage in, so we put in various tapes to stop the air leaking. And if you're doing the whole house, you can end up with a lot of insulation going in. So this is my client very proudly standing in front of all the insulation that he's about to put in. Next slide, please. And how it goes on. So you've got the diaphanite behind, and then you basically put it on like tiling. And in this bit is a new build bit. So we've got it full filled with flexible wood fibre. Then we've got this material called compact foam, which is structural, but it's insulating, and so we can fix the windows into that. This is some flexible wood fibre. You can see here we've got the timber frame full filled with flexible wood fibre, and then the solid board on the top. And then for air tightness we use OSB, which is this material here, and then we tape it all up with these blue tapes. And this particular contractor was excellent at making sure things were airtight, so he was going around every single screw hole has got a bit of tape on. Next slide. That's me telling people about it. Windows. You might start with old leaky windows can have a U value of 5 to 7, and they can be taken down triple glazed, 0.85 to 1, or lower now. They're constantly improving that. And so these are some of our windows going in. And often people put windows in with spray foam. Problem with spray foam is it gets solid, it fills the gap, it's great, it expands into the gap, but it gets solid, and then if there's any movement, then there's a gap again. So this material here is a material which is it's a memory foam. It's a bit like a mattress that you might sleep on camping, and it just expands into the space, but if there's any movement, it just moves with it. And then we tape the windows into, we make sure everything's airtight by taping everything. And there's me showing more people around our project. And you can see we had these triple glazed windows, and a nice way to see that it's really airtight is that it has got 2 seals on it to really make sure that the air isn't coming through. So I've had triple glazing in a house where I put my kids' drawings next to the window, and then when it was windy, you could see the drawings flapping about. One thing that you have to be really careful with retrofitting is There's the structural components like steel, which will often be sitting in the outer envelope of the building, which you're then trying to insulate from the inside warm bit, and it's going right through the insulation. And you have to try and deal with that so it doesn't bring the cold in. Especially since it's a conductive material, it's really easy to get it in. So we sometimes wrap it in something called aerogel, which is this. Used sparingly because it's very, very expensive. And when we work out all our build-ups, I kind of see our wall build-ups as being a bit like a recipe. And I give the contractor this recipe and a how-to guide. Or it's like the recipe and then the method of putting it all together. And when I'm devising them, I run things through a calculator to make sure that we reach the U value and we reach all sorts of other things. So this will tell me if it's too wet. If you go to the next slide. This you can see it's starting to show moisture in the build-up. And yeah, so that will start to tell me I need to be a bit more careful about how I'm applying the materials. So I'm just going to touch on this project. It started as a rep. We did lots of work for a year and a half, and then it ended up rather beautiful, which was nice. We had a heat demand of 650 kilowatt hours per metre square per year. We used the passive house planning package to work out how we were going to reduce that. We took it from 650 down to, in fact, we got to our measured results are 33 kilowatt hours per metre square per year. And this sort of gives you the sort of average figures. Passive house down at 15, so we didn't quite get to passive house, but we were pretty close. Enbee 25, which we saw earlier. So a 92% recorded energy efficiency gain. An image of it before, same window afterwards. Very nice to have another architect visit and post this little comment, which I then have used in my slides ever since. So you've got the 60%, I've talked about the 60% reduction in energy consumption and 60% reduction in materials. When we analysed that project, we found that we had already met the 2030 targets. So whilst it's, I didn't even know that we'd done it until I put that project in for an award, and I went along to find out if we'd won. We didn't win, but I found out that we'd also hit the 2030 targets that day. So I was so excited about that, didn't matter that. So we met the 2030 targets, there we go, and a few pictures of the inside. So design and performance, really, really important for us, as it is for everyone here. And then what I've been doing since, which is to talk about the project. It's really important to get the word out, get people knowing about what's possible. Next slide. So I've got a challenge for all of you. So then remember the boulder. We're all pushing at the boulder. Everyone here is pushing at that boulder, and I'm hoping that you will join us in pushing at that boulder, because we need all of us. And just one more slide, I think, because we want adoption to be mass adoption. We want everyone to start seeing their neighbours doing something and think, oh, I should do that too. Thank you very much.